My name is Bixie. I am a plush toy designer. I've been designing my own plushes for about 6 years now. Last video, I showed you my very first plush designs, the ones that I made in high school, and now I will show you the ones that I made in college, or at least most of them. So when I got into college, I did have the background that I already knew some sewing stuff and some pattern making skills. This is when I went to school for toy design. So I did have a professor who was a professional plush designer, and she taught me about kit bashing. She taught me about pattern pieces, layouts, counts, cutting on grain. Of course, I took sewing lessons in middle school, and I had a fashion teacher in high school. So I knew a lot of this stuff already. So for me, it was really just a test of how far can I take this, and really asking the teacher for specifics and helping guiding me specifically on making my own patterns. So basically, the project started by having to design a plush. This is one of the drawings I did really early on. I've lost some of them, so I don't have all my original sketches to show you. But this is where I started from. You can see it doesn't have any color, it's just getting the general idea of shapes. I really wanted to make something with long legs, as this was 2021 and like leg day memes were really big. That guy from Undertale was really big. The Legs song, so that was really what was inspiring me. But after we designed that, then we brought it further into the design process. We chose colors. I don't have any pictures of it, but for me, our teacher really wanted us to play with shapes first, and other people in class had been using butcher paper, which is just brown, very cheap paper, to mock designs. So I was just making shapes that I thought would work based on my history designing. Patterns I knew a little bit, so I started with very simple shapes, and I mentioned having a design teacher for fashion design. So for the hips, I took inspiration from the shoulder seams of shirts. They have a really nice curve that lays flat on the shoulder, so that is what I referenced to bring the hips flat to what they would be. But even with that head start, it took a lot of fine-tuning to get it to be how I wanted it to be, and even at the end of the design process, it still wasn't perfect. Here you can see all the fabric models I made during this project, and we're going to go through them one by one to see what I changed after each iteration. Conte was my professor's choice. It's very thick, and it's a knit fabric, so it works very well if your final draft is going to be a pile fur fabric. But I was using Minky, so I really needed to be working with a muslin fabric instead, so I switched over to muslin after the first draft. Also, some of the ratios were wrong. I didn't like the hair buns, I didn't like the arms, the dress needed tweaking, the hips were still a bit wonky, and you can see one leg was longer than the other. So that needed to be fixed. So after the Conte, I moved on to the muslin models. So I made 3 of them. Each were different in what needed to be fixed and what needed to be modified. I struggled with how to properly align the pieces. You can see on one of the models that the face was sewn inside out and that the hair poo fell off, so I needed to look into that. That model also had hands that were just misaligned, so I needed to fix that as well. Obviously, all the models I needed to work on the hip seams more and figure out what ratios and what angles worked to make the hips flat. So as I said before, I did not do a lot of copies of the dress, so I did do one out of muslin, and I was sort of happy with it. I should have used the closure I did on the muslin copy in the final. It worked a lot better to have 3 segments of hook and loop tape. I also played around with the eye placements in the muslin model, and one of them doesn't have a head because I was just trying to figure out the legs on that one. That was the main focus, was the body. But the 3 models, each one got progressively closer to what I wanted. And then I had 1 color model. So the color model came after I sort of went through everything I wanted to work on with the muslin. I had gotten really happy with the shape. I wanted to see how it translated with the actual fabric that I would be using in the final. So that's what I did. I really didn't like the eye placements, and I really didn't like the dress. Both of those really needed to be reworked and refined for the final. So that's what I chose to work on after I got all the shapes and I saw the first color model. The 3-piece hook and loop tape was a really good choice, but I didn't like how I finished the seams on the tulle. I didn't like how the tulle connected to the dress, and the armhole seams were just a little bit too small. The back of the dress was a little bit too noticeable and jutted out a lot, which is why I ended up changing it, but the closure was definitely the best out of the choices. And then I had a color final. So this plush was made as part of a project in my college curriculum. So there was a deadline and restrictions that I had to follow. So this is the plush that I passed in as the final for that project. Not everything was perfect. I did not get a perfect grade. The dress, hips, and eyes, which I have mentioned working on as part of my other drafts, weren't the cleanest, and they still had struggles in the final draft. So I did get points off for those, but it did turn out pretty well. And I was able to learn and grow a lot from this, but I did end up revisiting this my senior year to correct the things that needed correcting. However, this is the draft of the project that went with me to New York Toy Fair. Since I was part of a toy design major and all my teachers were part of toy design companies and had connections, my class all got invitations to go to New York Toy Fair, which is a industry show for people in the toy design profession, which was really cool. And here's a picture of me next to my model. So that got to be displayed as Toy Fair to represent some of what toy design does, especially our majors, and I was really proud of that. So this is my currently updated copy of this plush. So I do want to say, as a disclaimer, there are multiple years, I would want to say 2.5 years in between when I did the first final and when I did the updated final. And during that time, I made a lot of my own patterns and I learned a lot in my school. So there is a whole heap of knowledge that we are missing during the jump from final 1 to final 2. And that jump in skill is what made this updated version possible. Oh, so I took my time way more in the updated final. So since the class finished, I was able to add more pattern pieces, mainly for the eyelashes, and I was able to be a bit more creative in the size because there was a size limitation, and it just gave me more time and more freedom to do what I wanted with this project and have it be exactly how I wanted it to be. So I made the hair even bigger because I like the drama. The eyes, I decided to just use safety eyes, but I didn't put them in all the way so I could change them out and have the eyelashes behind them, which is not safe. It would not have passed the class, but it looks nice, and that's what I wanted to present. The hips, I finally figured out a way to not work on them anymore. I just understuffed them, and suddenly there wasn't a little jut there where the seams were. The dress, I just added another layer of tulle, and that really helped the volume and helped the visual interest. And then I took my time and I just finished them a lot nicer. Something that my class does, we have a final exhibition our last week of school. So I knew I was updating this project for that specifically, and I knew a lot of people would be seeing it. So I took my time and I really wanted to make sure my pattern making skills and my design skills could shine. But that was a tough project. But I think for my first design that I did, literally all of the pattern from scratch and connected all of the pieces, this was my first one, and she was beautiful. But besides that, I had that one plush class, and then the other plushes I made in college were done outside of classes that I did in my own free time because I wanted to do it, and I thought they would make good portfolio pieces, or I thought it was a fun idea that I really wanted to do, or I made it for friends. So this is a project that I designed during my summer job as a camp counselor. I originally designed it because I was out in the wilderness a lot and mushrooms were very popular. This was about 2022, so I wanted to design something based around like nature and pop culture, so this is what came to mind. So the original illustration I seem to have lost, but I have the digital illustrations that I did when I got access to a laptop again. So it was a whole group of mushrooms. I called them mushroomies, like mushroom roommates. I thought it was pretty clever, but I wanted to stick with a very neutral color palette, which, as you can see, the plush I did not do. I talked about before wanting to be cheap and use inexpensive materials. Well, the best inexpensive material is one that you already got for a different project, so I reused that fabric. For her, I did go back into the mushroom cap. It was very simple. I didn't really know what I was doing to make the mushroom cap warped like that. So I just made a bunch of triangles going back to my roots, simple geometry, sewed all the triangles together to make a circle, sewed that circle to a circle with a hole in it, and then sewed that small hole within the bigger hole onto the mushroomy. And that was how I got the cap onto the head of my little guy. And then hop back to senior year, I made this guy also for my senior exhibition. He was one of the other mushroomies. I wanted to make another one that actually fit the color scheme I planned, so I went out and I got fabric for that. The fabric was still cheap fleece, and I designed it pretty similarly. I just changed the pattern from the first one. I had to start from scratch for the mushroom head though, and that was pretty difficult. I made, I want to say, 2 versions. I did not take video of them because they did not turn out well, and I really could do with going back and putting some just extra stitches in to help bring the shape together. But I think all in all, it was a pretty cool project, and I really like how they came out. For this one, I did 3D model my own eyes. So I 3D modeled it, printed it out, painted it, and then I could not connect them. The piece that I printed out to hold the eye on did not fit properly, and I did not want to reprint them because this was getting pretty close to when my exhibition was. So I just stuck them in there and hoped they wouldn't fall out. And sometimes they do get lost under the fur or they fall out, but if they're just sat for display like this guy usually is, it seems to be fine. I should really go back and do the stitches like I did on the pink one just to add some more form to the mushroom. It's a lot easier to add holding stitches and cosmetic stitches after the sewing fact than it is to find the perfect shape of pattern to get that shape. And then both of these mushroomies all have their limbs connected. So their head is connected to the body, the arms are connected to the body, the feet are connected to the body. They both have the same main pattern, just with small tweaks between the pink one and the yellow one. So by this point, this was only my second pattern in toy design college. I was already pretty confident in my ability to connect limbs and to make simple shapes like a body and arms. So without counting the big project for my next video, this is the last project and pattern that I fully fleshed out in college. This is my silly little goose, which started out as a silly little duck, and I will give you a sneak preview at the big project. I designed this egg, and I worked really hard getting the face of the duck to be cute, especially the beak. So I decided I don't want to just have it be a fan art piece. I wanted to make it into something that I can actually use in my portfolio and say, hey, I designed this from scratch. So I decided to make a real duck out of it. And at the time, my friend called me Silly Goose a lot. So instead of a duck, I decided to remake it into a silly goose in honor of my friend and the nickname. So that's what I did. I took the beak, which honestly on the goose looks a little bit silly. I could have done some cosmetic stitches just to bring the shape in a little bit more, but it was a very quick project. I want to say it only took a week. The head isn't the best. It's a little flat. The wings, I really like how they came out. The feet are a little big. I shrunk them a lot from the muslin copy to the final copy. Even so, the final draft did come out remarkably similar to what I drew originally, so I will show you the digital sketches that I made before I started sewing. Here you can also see all of my iterations while drawing. It took a lot of iterations messing around with all the different shapes of the body to figure out what proportions I really wanted to do, and then at the top of the page you can see part of my process when I start with a drawing is I will sort of ghost in where I want a seam to be, and I will imagine what shapes that I need the sewing pattern to be to fill in what I want the finished product to be. So I'm just imagining what the shapes are going to look like in the pattern before I start patterning it out for real. I still think she's very cute, and I do get a lot of compliments on her. I really enjoy how the body came together, and I do think that the nose, the beak was such a difficult piece, but it came out pretty close. I will say for the beak, I did make it out of clay first, and then I did the technique where you wrap it in plastic wrap and then tape, and then you cut the pattern off of the clay, which is how I got it to be that shape without much design prototyping. It was a very neat hack, and I do recommend that for more complicated pieces. Maybe for not a whole project, but more complicated pieces, it definitely helped. It also has something that's called a muzzle tie. This is really often used in stuffed teddy bears. It goes inside the plush around the seam where the beak is, and it sort of holds the muzzle or the beak closer together. You can see it a little more in my muslin model. I think it held up a little better in that. I think in the final draft, the minky was just too strong against the muslin I used. I should have used a stronger fabric. That's kind of why I would want to go back with cosmetic stitches. Both cosmetic stitches and the muzzle tied together would make a very strong connection that would be hard to tear. But if anything, I would rework the head and the beak a little bit, but it is pretty close to what I wanted. And by this point, I had learned so much about patterns that I really wanted to stretch the limits, which is why I stopped doing as many cosmetic stitches by the time senior year rolled around. I really wanted to just pay attention and work closely as I could on making my patterns as good as they could get and as close to what I wanted. But now, looking back, I can see that the cosmetic stitches help a lot, and I really need to start doing them again. But yeah, this is my silly little goose. So thank you for watching. I hope you had a great time. I hope you took away some points that you'll use in your own practice in trying to design plushes, or that you took away, wow, these are cute. Bixie Bee, you should make a pattern for this one, and this one. Tell me down below. Thank you.